father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad. This brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." Now, we know this story. It's about a wayward son. And really, that's us. It's about our human tendency to wander away in our sin and selfishness. It's about how often we're like the prodigal and willfully take our Father for granted. And it's about how good God is when he takes us back and receives us home and lavishes us with his undeserved love. If you guys could use a refresher on this story, I'll recommend a book for you. One of the best books I've ever read, period, and absolutely the best book on this passage of Scripture is by Henry Nouwen. It's called The Return of the Prodigal. The Return of the Prodigal. It's so good and goes in depth into all of this. It's where I got everything that I taught through when I taught through this passage. It's so good. But what I want to do today is pull us out of the position of the prodigal, which is where most of us sit when we read this story. And I want to go back to kind of that dinner party perspective. All right? So we're going to start here, all right? And try to see the story under the story. So here's a question for you, or not a question for you. Here's our first point. If we're going to look at the story under the story, it's this. Don't be surprised when you end up playing the role of the Pharisee. All right? And here's what I mean by that. As uncomfortable as it is, when we start reading the stories of Jesus, we need to put ourselves in the position of the Pharisee. We have to read these stories every once in a while and realize that we're not always the good guy. So now let me ask you another question about some childhood stuff, right? We talked about favorite stories, but now let's think about Halloween costumes. How many of you can remember picking out a Halloween costume when you were a kid? When I was a kid, we picked out Halloween costumes at the store G.L. Perry. Did anybody have a G.L. Perry in town? That's so weird. Makes me feel really old to say that. But we would go and we would get like the pre-packaged Halloween costume in like the plastic. Maybe you had a really crafty mom who like helped you make a Halloween costume. That wasn't my life. But I remember when I was a kid, I never really wanted to be like the creepy, spooky, gross Halloween costume. I like mostly wanted to be like a cute kitty or something. Like just like I never really wanted to be something creepy. Did anybody really like being something creepy for Halloween? Anybody? No. Like I just wanted to be something like fun, right? I didn't like the idea of it. Did anybody like being something creepy or ghouly? No. We only had one taker in the first service. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like that's kind of true in life too. Like in life, in real life, most of us don't like being the bad guy. Do you know what I mean? Like at work, we don't like being the guy who has to like put out the fires or put on the boss hat and lay down the law. You know what I mean? Like nobody wants to be the one who has to come in and bear the bad news. Like I don't like having to use my mom voice. Like I don't like being the bad guy, even when I sometimes have to be. And I especially don't like when I'm the one who's in the wrong, like if I'm the one who's misstepped or overstepped or screwed up or acted like a jerk. Do you know what I mean? Like, like it when I'm the one who's in need of correction or in need of conviction, right? We don't like being the bad guy. And so, when we come to the scriptures and start reading these stories and start looking at these stories, especially the stories of Jesus, like our first instinct is to read these stories and like side against the Pharisees. Do you know what I mean? We're like, oh my gosh, what bullies. Those bad guys. Oh my gosh, they're so judgmental. They're so critical. Ugh. That older brother. Ugh. What a critical, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get the point that I'm making? We've got to be careful. The truth is, like if I had asked you, before I read the whole prodigal son story, and was like, hey, who remembers the prodigal son? We'd be like, oh yeah, I've got that one memorized. Do you know what I mean? My guess is that half of us would have only remembered the first half of the story. We would have been like, oh, yeah. It's about like a son, and he asks for his half of the inheritance, and he squanders it, and he runs away, and then his father welcomes him home. And we might have even forgotten that there was a second half of the story. But let me tell you, I don't think that Jesus was inspired to tell this story because of his overflow of love for the people. Sure, yeah, of course, he loves us. Jesus was inspired to tell this story in response to the Pharisees' critical, hardened hearts, right? He told it in response to that dinner party scene and to the way that they turned their noses up at the tax collectors and the sinners and to Jesus' embrace of them. This is why Jesus is telling the story. And so if we are only focusing on the first half, the touchy-feely first half, then we're missing the point, period. And so to get there, guys, we've got to let ourselves do the uncomfortable thing where we literally step into the Pharisees' shoes. Oh, it is uncomfortable to let ourselves be the Pharisees. But we got to do it. We've got to do it. And so to do it, I have some really uncomfortable questions to ask us. And I don't like them, but I'm going to ask them, okay? So I'm going to put these questions on the screen, and I didn't like writing them any more than I like asking them to you right now. Are you excited? Yeah. Yes, let's do it. Here are some questions just to mess us up a little, okay? Here we go. All right, here's some questions. Have you ever thought poorly of someone because their choices are not your choices? Because the way that they've chosen to live their life isn't the way you choose to live your life. And you can't get over it. Just don't like it. Now, we can all agree that the younger son's choices were not good choices, right? They were sinful choices. They weren't just like, he could have chosen better. Like he chose poorly. He chose things that deeply offended the Father. Like he chose sin. We can call it what it is. But let's ask this second question, okay? Do you hold resentment in your heart towards someone because of past behavior that's been